It looks so peaceful, doesn't it? No emails, no Slack notifications, no rent anxiety. Just soft, light, homemade sourdough bread and a husband who handles the scary stuff. So you can just be.
Kisses in the morning leave me dreaming the whole day through. Searching for my 1950s woman.
If you were watching those videos at 11 p.m. after a 10-hour shift, feeling a desperate pull towards that life, you aren't betraying your feminism. You're just exhausted. We were promised that if we worked hard, we could have it all. Instead, we just got more work. So the fantasy of opting out, it makes perfect sense, especially at this time of late-stage capitalism. But here's the scam. The women selling you this simple homesteading life, they didn't opt out of capitalism. They mastered it. While they tell you to submit to a husband and delete your LinkedIn, they are running full-time media businesses, negotiating six-figure brand deals, and managing production teams. They aren't housewives. They're CEOs. They aren't fixing your burnout. They're profiting from it. We're talking about Tradwives today. Before we get started, you know what to do. Love or hate, like and share, because the algorithm does not care. To understand why millions of women are suddenly romanticizing 1950s servitude, we have to look at what they're running from. For the last decade, the dominant cultural narrative for women was girl boss feminism, which is basically white feminism. We were told that the path to liberation was paved with promotions. If we just leaned in hard enough, color-coded our calendars, monetized all of our hobbies, we would be free. Well, we leaned in, and most of us fell on our ass. Instead of liberation, we got the second shift on steroids. We got stagnant wages, rising rents, and a culture that demanded we perform effortless perfection both at work and at home. The promise was that if we worked like men, we'd get the power men have. But the reality is that the workplace was never designed for us. The workplace wasn't designed for humans, really. It wasn't designed for anyone that needs to sleep. And the data backs this up. According to the 2024 Women in the Workplace report, nearly half of all women report feeling consistently burnt out. We are exhausted, y'all. And this is where the Tradwife steps in. She offers a seductive binary. The world is hard? Then leave it. The workplace is toxic? Retreat to the kitchen. It's a classic pendulum swing. We went from your value is your productivity to your value is your domestic productivity. Notice a pattern? In both versions, your ass is still working way too much. The only difference is that in one scenario, you have a paycheck and a 401k. In the other one, you ain't got shit. The aesthetic relies on a very specific historical memory, the 1950s nuclear family. It's presented to us as a time when moral values were stronger, gender roles were clearer, and everyone was just happier. Meanwhile, any thinking person knows that the 1950s housewife aesthetic is bullshit Cold War propaganda. Anytime I hear people long for the nuclear family and say, oh, we have to get back to the good old days, the nuclear family, it just makes me want to laugh. Because those good old days were neither good or old. In the scope of human history, the nuclear family is 1/100th of a blip. That system as we know it is a post-World War II era economic arrangement that had more to do with capitalism and Cold War ideology than it had to do with anything else. If the nuclear family was so great, why is it that the first chance women got, millions of us left that arrangement? I think it has to do with who it was great for. It was never intended to be good or great for women. That system was built for men and capitalism, and I can prove it. A lot of people either forget or they don't know that the Cold War was really a culture war. Courtesy of PBS. From the American Experience, Mrs. America, Women's Roles in the 1950s. A propaganda war. Embedded in the propaganda of the time was the idea that the nuclear family was what made Americans superior to the communists. Women in America were constantly showed pictures of starving women in like ratty clothes while their children, starved and froze to death, to talk about, the evils of communism. Contrasted with American women in their nice little sundresses with their nice updos, tending to the home and wanting nothing more out of life. If you went to college, it was assumed that you went to find a husband. But read that down there. Despite the fact that employment rates rose for women during that time. That's the part they don't tell you about the 50s. Workforce participation, specifically for married women, went up during the 50s. the images and the lore that we think of the 1950s in no way reflected the reality of women's experiences of the 1950s. We aren't looking at a moral difference. We're looking at an economic anomaly. In 1957, the median male income was about $4,700 a year. That sounds low, but here's the key metric. The average family spent only 11% of that income on housing. That means a single high school graduate could own a home, support a wife and children, and still have money available to save. The Tradwife only existed because the economy paid for her to exist. Fast forward to 2024. For the vast majority of households, the single income family is statistically impossible. To maintain that same standard of living today often requires 2 full-time salaries. And even back in 1957, Black Americans had a poverty rate of 55%. So Black women, we've always worked outside the home. Poor immigrant women have always worked outside the home. This is why the Tradwife trend feels so exclusive. Because it is. To be a stay-at-home wife in this economy, you don't just need a traditional man. You need a rich one. We have to look at the bank accounts behind the sourdough starter. Take Ballerina Farms, for example, the queen of rural simplicity. Her simple life isn't funded by selling eggs at the farmer's market. It's backed by generational wealth. Her husband is the son of the founder of JetBlue Airlines, and their operation sits on millions of dollars of Utah land and livestock. That stove in her kitchen is a vintage AGA cast iron range, often referred to as the Agnes. It cost $30,000. That's not homesteading. That's a corporate empire in cowboy boots. Then there's Nara Smith. She isn't a stressed out housewife trying to stretch a grocery budget. She and her husband are both professional models, and she has an estimated net worth of over $5 million. She's landed 6-figure brand deals with Marc Jacobs. Or look at Estee Williams, who preaches submission and staying home, yet runs a modern digital business monetizing the very message through sponsorships and affiliate links. These women aren't surviving on a single income in a fluctuating economy. They are the CEOs of media companies that sell you the fantasy of a life that they don't even actually live themselves. So when we see these influencers baking bread in their sprawling farmhouses or their luxury apartments, we aren't watching a tutorial on traditional values. We're watching conspicuous consumption. The Tradwife aesthetic is a luxury good, just like a Birkin bag or a Tesla. It signals to the world, my partner is so wealthy that I can afford to opt out of the labor market entirely. It's a status symbol disguised as humility. Here's the ultimate irony. The women telling you that your highest calling is to serve your husband and raise your children, they are spending 40, 50, sometimes 60 hours a week filming, editing, and marketing themselves to you. Let's break down the labor required to make a single 60-second day in the life reel. As someone who also does content creation for a living, I can tell you, you need to write a script. You need to storyboard the shots. You need to set up the lighting. You need to bake the bread or cook the food, probably more than once, because the first loaf might not look pretty enough for the camera, which is why I don't make this kind of content. It's far too labor intensive. Then you spend God knows how many hours editing, color grading, writing captions, adding graphics, analyzing your retention metrics. But I'm guessing these women have enough money to hire someone to edit their content for them and to do all of that stuff. Meanwhile, me and most of us on here, like Melanie Hamlet and Bourbon Bougie, we're all one-women dog and pony shows. Writing, filming, editing, sound mixing, that's all me, my labor. I single-handedly create all of this stuff. So please like and subscribe and share this video, because this work is hard. Anyway, this isn't domestic bliss. This is content creation, and it is a grind. It's a lot of labor. The most successful Tradwives aren't submitting to their husbands. They're submitting to the algorithm. They answer to their brand partners. They negotiate contracts. Their submission is performance art that generates ad revenue. Ballerina Farms' YouTube channel alone generates tens of thousands of dollars in ad revenue for her per month. When an influencer tells you to quit your job and trust a man to provide, she is giving you advice that she herself is not taking. She hasn't made herself financially vulnerable. She's built a diversified media business where she is the primary asset. If her husband leaves, she still has the brand deals, the YouTube AdSense, and the audience, because the brand is her. If you follow her advice, quit your job and let your skills atrophy, and your husband leaves, you don't have a media empire to fall back on. You have nothing. They are selling you a lifestyle that is subsidized by the very modern capitalist hustle that they claim claim to despise. They're hypocrites. There's also an underlying political agenda at work here. If we look past the sourdough starters and the floral dresses, we find something much darker than just a typical internet grift. It's a recruitment strategy. The Tradwife trend acts as the soft power wing of a very hard-right political movement. Experts call it the trad to far-right pipeline. It starts with a recipe for homemade cereal, algorithmically leads you to biblical gender roles, and eventually lands you in the middle of Christian nationalist ideology.
You can always have your career. Being able to have a family truly is a very limited, short window. And then once your babies are grown and the nest is empty, go back to your career. There's nothing wrong with that. If you don't have a career, you have your babies, the Lord's going to inspire something inside of you that you're like, you know what? There's a problem. I have a solution. How many baby companies have been born out of moms?
Especially if you're a young woman, don't put it off. You can always have a career. You can always, go back to work.
Erica Kirk is such a fucking liar. Out here selling women on this pipe dream, this idea that you can just skip education, you should get married, have babies in your early 20s, and then after raising your kids, if you want a career later, you can do that when they're grown. Did you know as a woman, if you take time off to raise your family, you will permanently decrease your earning potential? Let's be crystal fucking clear. Erica doesn't want women in the workforce. She wants women at home raising babies and feeding into the Christian nationalist lifestyle. Because young women who are saddled with children early on are far easier to manipulate and control, both emotionally and financially. We can't all follow the Erica Kirk career path, can we? Where we get married in our 30s, push out a couple babies, then suddenly our husband is tragically assassinated, we inherit Turning Point USA and become the CEO, which then means we're worth millions and millions, and we have all of the resources at our disposal to help raise our kids while we build our career telling other women not to have one.
This aesthetic is doing the PR work for a political agenda that explicitly wants to drive women back into the home, to remove us from public life of any kind. When you hear rhetoric about returning to tradition or making the family the center of life again, you have to ask, whose tradition and at what cost to your autonomy and your safety? The goal isn't just for you to bake bread. The goal is to make the idea of women participating in the workforce, in politics, and in public life feel unnatural again. They're using cozy aesthetics to sell you a future where women have no voice. There are far-right creators already talking about repealing the 19th Amendment. But let's talk about the part of this fantasy that almost never makes it into the highlight reel. What happens to the real tradwives when it doesn't work out? The tradwife aesthetic sells you on the idea of a protector, but in a capitalist society, your primary protector is not your husband. It's having access to your own resources. We don't live in the 1950s legal system anymore. No-fault divorce exists. The cost of living has skyrocketed. If you opt out of the workforce for 10 years to raise children and submit to your husband, and then your husband leaves you, gets sick, or becomes abusive, you're not just heartbroken, you're destitute. Data from domestic violence organizations is terrifyingly clear on this. 99% of domestic violence survivors report experiencing financial abuse. When you have no income, no credit history, and no resume, you don't have the option to leave. That's not sanctuary, that's a cage. Being an independent woman is hard, but I'd rather struggle sometimes as an independent woman than have my survival be dependent on whether or not one man loves me. Because what happens when that man stops loving you? Exactly. This is why this tradwife trend is so dangerous. It frames vulnerability as virtue. It tells young women that the ultimate act of trust is to hand over their survival to someone else. But notice, the women selling you this advice are not doing that. If you want to know what the tradwife life actually looks like when the cameras are turned off, you don't need to listen to the women currently selling it. You need to listen to the women who survived it. This is Lauren, known online as Life Take Two. She's an ex-tradwife, ex-Mormon, and ex-MAGA supporter who escaped the very lifestyle that TikTok is currently romanticizing.
If you are a young 14, 16, 21-year-old girl, listen up. I drove to the grocery store. I need to grab some milk and bread and a couple things, flipped open the Pink app on my phone, and I've been sitting in my car crying ever since because I never have enough money. Why do I never have enough money? Because when I was a 19-year-old girl, I fell in love. My Mormon faith told me that I was supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. I got married. I started having babies. I dropped out of college. I never had a career. My only jobs that I ever had in life were a waitress at the Olive Garden and managing a pretzel maker in a mall. Oh, my first couple years of marriage, I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I bought a windshield business. I was 20. And my Mormon stake president reminded me that women weren't supposed to work, so I quit my own business, handed it over to my husband, took my name off of it. I would work our family business throughout the next 24 years of my marriage, but I never got paid. I didn't have a salary. My name wasn't on it. I literally worked for room and board. That's it. I would eventually also launch a custom home building company with my uncle as the architect and my friends as the builder, my designs, my realtor, but again, because my husband was the man, his name was on all of the projects, his name was on the business. I remember one of the last custom homes that I built, we sold it and made about a $260,000 profit. That money all went into his bank account. I didn't even have a bank account. I should have said that in the beginning. I never had a bank account. He would give me little envelopes of cash to go grocery shopping with. I had worked on building that house for 2 years. All of the money went into his bank account. Nothing was under my name. I got a piano and I got a free house to live in. And I got groceries. So I found myself divorced at age 44 just 5 years ago, and within just a few months I was living in my car while he made about $250,000. He would eventually quit that job so that he wouldn't have to pay alimony and child support. He has only paid alimony one time ever in the 5 years since we've been divorced. Once ever. And it never bothered me once that my financial security was dependent on that man being in love with me. I never realized that him liking me or not liking me or finding me sexy or attractive or interesting determined whether or not my children could eat. I have no retirement. I have no savings, no education, no resume. I was almost a straight A student throughout all of my education. I went to college at age 17. I had dreams for my future. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wonder why. Why I didn't have a fucking backup plan. Why my kids eating and having stability was dependent on a romantic relationship. Why nobody told me to put money in the bank. Why nobody told me don't have babies until you have an education and some experience. Don't have so many kids. I wish somebody had told me to put my name on our vehicle loans and to put my name on our houses. I wish somebody had told me that it's okay to put those babies in daycare for a couple days a week and go to college and have a job. And I think I need to do an entire Tradwife sequel, because you can be happy and rich and loving your life like Ballerina Farm until the guy walks out. I want you guys to imagine for a minute, even rich Hannah, if Deanna walked out, if all of his financial backing and he had to sell the farm, and then what does she have? Find another rich boy to marry? I just don't want one more woman to DM me, comment, send me their stories, cry to me about how hard it is for them to support their families, and I'm so tired of living my own story. We have to make this stop. Raise your daughters to be financially independent. Focus on their futures and educations just as much as you focus on your sons. I wish that someone had done that for me.
She signed over the business that she started, and her labor made them hundreds of thousands of dollars in income over the course of their marriage. Yet she left with nothing. Well, not nothing. Sadly, her husband did leave her with something.
All of the trigger warnings you can possibly imagine having a video having. 7 or 8 years ago at Christmas time, we were away for Christmas and I got a little yeast infection. We were out of town, so I called my doctor and asked if he could just send a prescription for diflucan. I tended to have a lot of these infections. So he sent over the diflucan. I took the full course and then it didn't go away. It wasn't yeast. It wasn't any other bacterial infection. Then, as you guys all know the punchline, I found out that my Mormon returned missionary husband of 22 years had been cheating on me with SCX workers. And yes, as soon as he confessed, my next question was, did you use protection? He was driving down to State Street in Salt Lake City and picking up substance-addicted SCX workers on a recurring basis. And his answer to the protection question was no. When I asked him, how could you do that to me after everything that I've been through to regain my health and how sick I've been and how fragile I am? My husband, the father of my children, said to me, you're dying anyway. If I had sped that along, I probably would have been doing you a favor. So the next day I did make an appointment to go see my doctor. I said, it's an emergency. I'll never forget sitting in that little hospital gown thing on the edge of the little bed in his exam office, crying my eyes out. Yes, I did indeed have diseases that are spread by intimate contact. Jake also confessed to me that one of his girls was known to be Hep C positive, and that another one told him that he had HIV. Again, he didn't see fit to protect me from any of these women.
Lauren's story exposes the intersectionality of this trap. It wasn't just about being a homemaker, it was a package deal. High control religion, far-right politics, and total domestic servitude. It's no coincidence that so many of these tradwives are Mormon. I wonder, as much money as Hannah Nealman's Ballerina Farms makes, does she have any control over the millions of dollars that brand generates annually for her family? Or, like Lauren, does all that money go directly into her husband's bank account? Is her name on anything? Because she is that brand. Nobody could pick her husband out of a lineup. The labor, the image behind that brand, that is all her. Will she be compensated for any of that labor if her marriage ends? Will Nara Smith? The protection they promise is actually control. When Lauren left, she was finally able to find her voice, but not before she spent months living in her car or sleeping on her sister's couch, trying to figure out how she was going to feed her children.
Ain't got no damn apologies left in me. I've said my sorries, I've paid my fees. I'm done holding back who I was born to be.
Meanwhile, their father walked away with millions of dollars worth in assets that she helped build. But her content is the antidote to the aesthetic. It proves that while the image of the tradwife is fragile and requires perfect lighting to maintain, the reality of a woman's autonomy is messy, hard, but infinitely more valuable. So if girl boss is a burnout trap and tradwife is a dependency trap, what's the answer? The answer is that we stop trying to solve systemic problems with individual lifestyle choices. The solution to burnout isn't to retreat into the kitchen. It's to fight for a world where work doesn't crush us. We need affordable childcare. We need living wages. We need men to see domestic labor as a shared responsibility and not some favor that they do for us. Women deserve more than two terrible options. We deserve a life where we are not overworked and not owned. So don't let the algorithm sell you a fantasy of the past just because the present sucks. The 1950s are gone, and honestly, we're better off without them. See you next time.